The invitation had arrived in a cream-colored envelope, embossed with gold lettering that caught the light like a small sun. It read, "The Whitmore family cordially invites you to the annual gala, an evening of elegance and generosity." My name, Ethan Caldwell, had been printed beneath those words in a neat, formal font, along with the date, the second Saturday of November. I wasn't the kind of man who attended galas. I was a junior architect at a mid-sized firm in Chicago, and the only reason I'd received this invitation was because my company had recently completed a design consultation for the Whitmore Group's newest commercial tower downtown. My boss, Mr. Harrington, had been the one originally invited, but his wife had gone into labor 2 weeks early, and he'd thrust the envelope into my hands on a Thursday morning with a rushed, "Go, network, represent the firm. You'll be fine." I was not fine. I stood at the edge of the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate, holding a glass of something expensive that I was afraid to drink too quickly, wearing a rented tuxedo that fit well enough but felt like a costume. Around me, the city's most powerful people laughed with their heads thrown back, clinked crystal glasses, and moved with the easy confidence of those who had never once worried about a bill. The room was breathtaking. Chandeliers dripped with light like frozen waterfalls, and the floors were polished marble that reflected everything above them in pale, ghostly shimmer. Tall arrangements of white orchids stood on every table. A string quartet played something elegant in the far corner. It was, by every measure, a beautiful evening. And somewhere in the middle of all that beauty, I noticed her. She was standing near the grand staircase, just slightly removed from the nearest cluster of people, holding a glass of water with both hands. She looked to be in her mid-20s, wearing a simple navy blue dress that was tasteful and understated. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly. She was, by any measure, a composed and well-dressed young woman. But the left side of her face, from her temple down to the edge of her jaw, bore the silver-pink geography of old burn scars. They had the texture of a river delta seen from the sky, a landscape carved by something once violent and consuming. They were visible, undeniable, and they were the reason, I soon realized, that no one was standing near her. I watched for a few minutes, not wanting to believe what I was seeing, but it was unmistakable. People moved around her with the subtle choreography of avoidance. A man in a grey suit steered his companion away with a hand at her elbow before they got close. 2 women in designer gowns passed by, and one leaned toward the other and whispered something. The girl didn't appear to hear it, or perhaps she had simply become practiced at pretending not to. But I saw her shoulders tighten just slightly, the way a person braces themselves against a cold wind they've learned to expect. A waiter circled past her with a tray of appetizers. He paused for the couple to her left and the small group to her right, but passed her without stopping, his gaze skimming over her like she was furniture. She watched the tray go by and said nothing. I felt something tighten in my chest. I knew what it was like to be invisible in a room, though for far less profound reasons. I had been the quiet, bookish kid in school, the one who sat at the lunch table that no one rushed to join. I knew the particular weight of being in a crowded place and still feeling utterly alone. But what she was enduring was something sharper, something with intent behind it. This wasn't the passive loneliness of the overlooked. This was active exclusion, delivered in 100 small, deniable gestures. And then I noticed something that made it all land even heavier. I recognized the family portrait hanging in the entrance hall, the one I'd passed when I arrived. A broad-shouldered man with silver temples, his wife in pearls, and a young woman between them. The young woman in the portrait was smiling, her scars visible, her eyes bright. This was Nadia Whitmore, the millionaire's daughter, in her own home, at her own family's gala. And she was standing alone. I set my glass down on a passing tray and crossed the room. I won't pretend I did it without hesitation. There was a moment, just a breath of one, where the social anxiety I carried like a low-grade fever flickered up and suggested I mind my own business, that I'd only make things awkward, that she might not want to be approached. But I let that thought pass through me without acting on it, and kept walking. "Excuse me," I said, stopping beside her. I've been standing over there for 20 minutes, trying to look like I know what I'm doing, and I think we both know I don't. Would you mind if I stood here for a while instead? You seem significantly more settled than anyone else in this room." She looked up at me. Her eyes were dark brown, sharp and watchful, and for a moment she seemed to be calculating something, determining whether this was mockery, whether there was a punchline coming, whether kindness was a trap. "I'm Ethan," I said, offering my hand. "Junior architect, rented tuxedo, completely out of my depth." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile yet, more like the possibility of one. "Nadia," she said, and shook my hand. Her grip was firm. "This is my house. I'm still out of my depth." That made me laugh, genuinely laugh. And after a second, she did too. A real laugh, brief and surprised, like she hadn't expected to produce it. "That's actually worse," I said. "That means none of us have any hope." She glanced sideways at me, with something that was now, unmistakably, the beginning of warmth. "No," she agreed quietly. "I suppose not." We talked for a long time. I learned that Nadia had been in a car accident at 17, a collision that had involved fire, that had required multiple surgeries and years of recovery, and that had permanently altered the landscape of her face. She didn't tell me this in a rush of confession. It came out gradually, naturally, over the course of a conversation that had started with architecture. She had studied it briefly before switching to environmental science, and moved through books, through the particular loneliness of long hospital stays, through the way pain teaches you things about people that comfort never can. She was, I discovered, one of the most quietly remarkable people I had spoken to in years. She told me about the conservation project she was running in the Pacific Northwest, a wetlands restoration initiative that her father's foundation funded, but that she had built from the ground up, grant by grant, volunteer by volunteer. She had spent 2 summers living out of a trailer near a river estuary to oversee the work herself. She spoke about the hydrology of marshland with the same precision and love that I used when I talked about the load-bearing possibilities of a cantilevered structure. I told her about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about the drafting table my grandfather had kept in his garage and let me use, about how I'd fallen in love with the idea that spaces could be designed to make people feel welcomed or exposed, safe or anxious, small or expanded, just by the arrangement of walls and light and proportion. "That's what a scar does," she said quietly at one point, almost to herself. "What do you mean?" She considered it for a moment. "It rearranges the space of a face. It changes the architecture. And people don't know how to read the new layout, so they either stare or they look away. Neither one sees you. They just see the renovation." She paused. "That probably sounds strange." "No," I said. "It sounds exactly right." She looked at me carefully. "Most people either pity me or they overcompensate. They make a point of not looking at it, which is its own kind of staring. You've just been talking to me." "You're interesting," I said simply. "The rest of it isn't my business." A beat of silence stretched between us, the kind that has weight and texture. Then she said softly, "I won't forget you for that." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. But I felt the words settle somewhere. Later in the evening, someone put on a jazz standard instead of the string quartet, and I asked her to dance with the full knowledge that I was not a good dancer and the complete willingness to be embarrassing about it. She looked startled for a moment, genuinely caught off guard in a way that suggested no one at one of these events had ever asked her, and then she said yes. We were not graceful. I stepped on her foot once. She corrected my posture twice with a crisp, instructor-like efficiency that made us both laugh. A few people nearby glanced over, and I noticed a pair of women watching with an expression that was hard to categorize. Not unkind exactly, but uncertain. Like they were witnessing something that was reconfiguring their understanding of what was possible or appropriate. I didn't care. And more importantly, I watched Nadia stop caring too, in real time, across the duration of one song. By the end of it, she was not thinking about who was watching. She was just dancing. The evening wound down slowly. Her father, the formidable Arthur Whitmore, silver-templed, broad-shouldered, exactly as he appeared in the portrait, found us near the dessert table and shook my hand with a grip that suggested he hadn't always made his money sitting at a desk. "I see you've met my daughter," he said, and there was something careful in his voice, something that was both protective and relieved. "She was kind enough to rescue me," I said. "I was drowning over by the east wall." Arthur Whitmore laughed, and it was a real laugh, and I saw Nadia glance between us with an expression that I couldn't fully read, but that contained, I thought, a great deal. Before I left, she walked me to the entrance hall, past the portrait I'd noticed earlier. In person, the portrait seemed different than it had on arrival, the same image, but the light I was seeing it in had changed. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for just—" She stopped. "For talking to me like I was a person." The simplicity of it struck me with unexpected force. Like a person. That she had to thank a stranger for that. That this was the gift, not charity, not courage, just basic human recognition. "You made it easy," I told her honestly. She smiled, and it was a full one this time, unself-conscious and unguarded, the kind that arrived without permission. It changed her whole face, not by hiding anything, but by illuminating it. That should have been the end of the story. A single evening, a pleasant connection, one small kindness offered and received, the sort of thing that fades pleasantly into the background of a life. But 3 months later, I received an email from Nadia Whitmore. She had been asked to speak at an environmental science conference in Seattle, she wrote. It was the first time she had agreed to speak publicly about her conservation work at any event of significant size. For years, she had managed the project while staying carefully behind the scenes, letting the data and the results speak in her place, letting colleagues present the work to funders and boards while she remained the architect who didn't attend the ribbon cutting. She wrote, "I've spent a long time making myself small in rooms full of people. I think I've been hiding inside my work, which I love, but hiding nonetheless. I've been thinking about the gala and about what it felt like to stand in my own home and feel invisible. And I've been thinking about what it felt like for those few hours, not to. I think it's time I stopped waiting for someone to look at me before I decided to take up space. So I said yes." She spoke at the conference. I watched a short clip of it that someone posted afterward. She stood at the podium in a grey blazer, her hair down, the left side of her face fully visible in the stage lighting, and she spoke with precision and conviction about wetland carbon sequestration and community-based conservation models. She was not performing confidence. She simply had it. The audience was quiet and attentive, in the way audiences become when they sense they are in the presence of someone speaking from genuine authority. At the end, she received a standing ovation. We stayed in touch after that, not constantly, but in the easy, unhurried way of people who have made a genuine connection without pressure or expectation. She came to Chicago once for a sustainability forum, and we had dinner at a small Italian place on Wicker Park, where the lighting was warm and the room was loud, and no one stared at anything except their food. She told me over dinner that the Seattle talk had changed something for her. Not dramatically, not overnight, she was precise about this, but steadily. She had started attending meetings that she'd previously delegated. She had started putting her name first on research papers instead of last. She had gone back to a project she'd abandoned 4 years earlier, a proposal for a community wetland education center in rural Oregon, and restarted it. "I kept thinking about what you said," she told me, "about how spaces are designed to make people feel welcomed or exposed, safe or anxious, small or expanded. I'd been designing my own life to keep myself small. I'd built walls in all the wrong places." "You always knew that," I said. "Knowing it and believing you deserve something different are not the same thing," she said. The education center broke ground the following spring. I know this because Nadia sent me a photograph, not a text, but an actual printed photograph in an envelope, with a short note on the back in her handwriting. In the photo, she is standing in a field of tall grass near a river, wearing rubber boots and a hard hat, holding a shovel. She is laughing at something outside the frame. The left side of her face is fully lit by afternoon sun. On the back of the photo, she had written, "First day of something real. Thank you for the evening that started it." I kept the photograph. I put it on my drafting table, next to my grandfather's old compass and a small sketch of the first building I ever designed. Not because I deserved credit for what she built. I didn't. She built it herself, out of her own reserves of courage and intelligence and will. But because it reminded me of something I think I'd known but hadn't fully lived. That kindness is not a small thing. That showing up for someone, not dramatically, not as a rescuer, but simply as a person willing to stand beside them and talk, can be the thing that tips the balance. Not every act of cruelty leaves a scar, and not every act of kindness goes unremembered. I have thought about that evening many times since, about the mechanics of how exclusion works in a room, how it doesn't require a single dramatic act, how it assembles itself from dozens of small omissions, the tray that passes without stopping, the group that steers around someone, the whisper aimed precisely to land. No one person in that room would have described themselves as cruel. Most of them, asked directly, would have said they had nothing against Nadia Whitmore. They simply hadn't approached her. They simply hadn't thought about it. That is how these things work, not in villains, but in the accumulated weight of inattention. And I think about the inverse of that too. How connection works the same way, assembled from small moments, from the decision to cross a room, from the willingness to laugh, from the ordinary human act of treating someone like they're worth your full attention. I didn't give Nadia her confidence. I didn't solve her pain. I didn't fix the architecture of cruelty she navigated every day. I just stood next to her and talked to her like a person, and apparently that was enough of a foundation for her to build the rest herself. That is the thing about kindness that I keep coming back to. It doesn't ask you to be extraordinary. It asks you to be present. It asks you to notice. It asks you to cross the room instead of staying where it's comfortable. It is, as it turns out, the simplest and most demanding thing in the world. Last year, I attended the opening of the Nadia Whitmore Center for Wetland Conservation in Tillamook County, Oregon. It is a beautiful building, low and horizontal, built from reclaimed timber and glass, sitting at the edge of a restored estuary that shimmers like hammered silver in the morning light. The architecture is not mine, but I love it. It breathes. It welcomes. It was designed by a young woman from Portland who was fittingly on the first major project of her career. Inside, there is a small display near the entrance about the restoration project, before and after maps, photographs, data on species return and carbon sequestration. On the far wall, there is a quote painted in large plain letters. Every landscape that looks permanent was once changed by water. Nadia was there, of course. She stood at the front of the room and gave a speech that was warm and specific and funny, and she thanked about a dozen people by name. She didn't thank me. We had talked about this beforehand, and I'd insisted, because the story wasn't about me. The story was hers. But afterward, standing outside on the deck overlooking the estuary, she handed me a glass of something expensive that I was, this time, not afraid to drink. "I still think about that night," she said. "Me too," I said. I was so close to going home early. I'd been there an hour, and no one had spoken to me. I was thinking about calling a car. "I'm glad you didn't." She looked out at the water, where a great blue heron was standing in the shallows, with the absolute patience of something that has learned to wait. I used to think that being brave meant not being afraid. Now I think it just means doing the thing anyway, standing there anyway, waiting. We stood there for a while in the afternoon light, watching the heron and the water and the long flat distance of the estuary, and I thought about all the rooms in the world where someone is standing slightly apart from the crowd, holding a glass in both hands, waiting for the simple gift of being seen. I thought about how easy it is to give that gift, and how rarely anyone does.